On this episode of Teachers Hate Apples, ever wonder what a busy retirement looks like? Join me as my good friend Dr. Ray shares his extraordinary journey in a two-part episode. We will go from tragedy to action, how the loss of an LGBTQ plus student to suicide inspired Dr. Ray to dedicate his life to suicide intervention. We will take on the airwaves, discover the story behind his popular radio show, Homer Radio, and its impact on the community. And lastly, during this episode, we will talk about shaping education, learn about his impactful tenure on a local school board and his experience as a young gay teacher in 1970s in inner city schools. Dr. Ray was the recipient of the Harvey Milk Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018. Also in 2018, he received the World AIDS Day Award. In 2009, Community Service Award from the Pride Center. 2008, the Glisson Award. In 2003, he was inducted into the Columbia High School Hall of Fame. And in 1982, he received Teaching Fellowship Award from SUNY Albany. Alright, here is another great episode of Teachers Hate Apples. Today I have a retired teacher, professor, and a school board member, Dr. Ray. Although he is retired, he is not done impacting the world, especially with the LGBTQ plus youth. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ray.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Alex, and I can't wait for your, I'm sure, most enlightened questions.
I'm really excited that you're on the show, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. And I've always enjoyed all the conversations that we've had. So, and thank you for being a dear friend to me.
I'll right back at you with that. I've enjoyed them too. The pleasure's all been mine.
So I know that you conduct suicide intervention and counseling through the Trevor Project, and you also host a radio show. Can you briefly explain what both of those are?
Well, I'll start with the interventions. Students at great risk, and age-wise, that goes from what is now referred to as middle school all the way well into college. I started with GLISSEN, and that acronym means Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educational Network. And that's where I, was trained to work with students who were considering taking their lives. I have a master's degree in clinical psych, so it was a good match. And then I moved from there to the Trevor Project, and I was trained again. Ironically, or interestingly, the methods that they use are not synonymous. They're similar and they overlap, but they are different. I actually started it because the third year that I taught 7th grade English, the week after school was out, one of my students hung himself from a tree a few days before his 14th birthday. And I wrote a book back in the 80s. Actually, it was released in 1985. And if you're looking for collector's items, you might find it. It's called Where Do I Go From Here? I couldn't go into the gay theme, but it was a story about his life. And it was my tenure year, and it was in 1973 and 74, you just couldn't talk to a child about sex. I became aware of his problems because of one of the requirements I had in my English classes, and that was to keep a daily journal. And we made a pledge with the parents on Parents' Night that they were totally confidential, and most of the parents abided by that back in the old days. And the journals became pivotal in getting to know the kids. And he wrote extensively about Edgar Allan Poe. He did not talk about his sexual preference, but I had figured it out. And we reached the end of the year when the tests have been given and the books have been collected, and I allowed the students, like most teachers, to gather around and talk at their desks in a reasonable manner. And he came to me, and he wanted to talk. He had questions. I knew they were dog whistles, quote unquote, for what he really wanted to talk to. And I think we were building even more of a bond than we had before school ended, and this horrible tragedy occurred. September came around, and I get this wonderful letter from his mom saying the only teacher he ever talked about was me. And I was brokenhearted because I thought, he thought so much of me, and I didn't save him. And that was the initial motivation for me going into suicide counseling, which would not happen for a good number of years later. But I did work with kids once I came out. Wow. And as far as the radio show,
can I just stop you for 1 second?
Absolutely.
I just want to jump in and say that's an amazing story, and I just wanted to ask kind of what were the little hints that he was dropping in his journal that helped you figure it out?
Everything in the journal was very dark, and I mentioned the Poe references. He had read everything that you could find on Edgar Allan Poe, and he just ate it up alive, and he quoted the darkest verses there. And so I knew there was a dark side. And then he wrote about being unhappy and not really knowing anyone, which is markedly different from the relationship between the other junior high teachers, math, science, and social studies. He misbehaved terribly in those classrooms, and he wrote about that in his journal. And of course I heard about it because we had meetings with the 4 block teachers of the subjects I just mentioned, and we'd come down to me, and we were deciding whether any students couldn't go on our field trip to 5 Rivers, and all 3 of them said that he couldn't be allowed to step on a school bus. And I was puzzled, and we got into a very heated discussion. I thought of what was in his journal and what the other teachers were saying, and they couldn't understand that. And said, Ray, what does he do in your classroom? Well, he never did anything but please me. He's totally behaved, and they were talking about danger. And one of my most revered co-teachers and the man who hired me prior to that said, he's dangerous and the most untrustworthy student I've ever known. And this is somebody who's a veteran teacher. And I was puzzled. So that interface was what was in the journal, and I realized that everything was not good at all, and that the only one that was going to help him was me. And I've suffered terrible guilt as a result of that. And I tried to pay back the community, the LGBTQ plus community, by helping students not fall into that horrible trap.
Well, you certainly have made a big impact in it, and thank you for doing that. It's amazing work that you do. So sorry for cutting you off, but go ahead and explain your radio show.
Well, the show is called Homo Radio, of course, which is controversial in and of itself. It started in 1992. I started 18 years ago. It's billed as the voice of the LGBTQ community, and that's pretty much indication of what you'll find there. It's filled with interviews, students, teachers, principal, and regulars such as yourself.
Right.
One of our great recent additions, and a wonderful one.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for coming to join us. We try to cover every aspect of the LGBTQ plus world, especially psychologically, activity-wise. This particular week we'll have theater. We'll talk in depth about politics, and I'll be interviewed by you as an offshoot of this podcast. So yeah. It's a potpourri of topics and subjects, and we have news that you can't get anywhere else, and sometimes we answer viewers' questions and our listeners' listeners' questions, and it's kind of a summation of what what radio is all about.
Oh, that's great. Great explanation.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so I know you were a board member for quite some time at a local district, and during that time, what do you have a crazy story with parents yelling at the superintendent? Anything like that?
Actually, it was much more like they were yelling at me. I was a board member elected in 2000, and I served three-year terms in East Greenwich Central School District. And um, there is actually a quote you can Google in a New York Times piece about school boards, and it also appeared locally in the Times Record. It was started by Nick Cantiello, a journalist of some renown, and he said that I was arguably the most controversial school board member in United States school board history.
Wow.
And I didn't. My students didn't know how to take that. They loved it. I thought maybe it was, it was kind of a put down, but I come to treasure it now. I have it on my wall in my office. So I got involved in. I went where nobody had ever gone before. Initially, it had to do with the dissection of domestic animals. The meeting I remember the most of many was one that went till 3 a.m. And the argument was pretty basic, that you didn't have to dissect domestic animals. You could do it virtually. And ultimately, we're proven very correct that the virtual dissection was much more effective, and it didn't have the chaos and the just, riotous behavior that some classes found themselves in when these kids were doing this. And so that was one. Another one was, and you would certainly in your position understand this, the IEPs, individual educational programs. I saw that a lot of parents were not getting what they were supposed to from this legal document, and it is indeed a legal document. And we legally, we sued. Again, I had lawyers pro bono against the school lawyers to allow me to go into these conferences and determine and negotiate what the kids would be given. And we won. And I went in for the kids with special needs, and I didn't let anybody, I did it like negotiating the purchase of a car. And that raised a lot of ruckus. But neither of the first two events could match when I proposed the starting of a gay-straight alliance for LGBTQ plus students with a paid advisor, which would make it official. And not just there were some informal clubs that didn't have advisors, but they wanted to, and the GSA was in that informal state. So that became the ultimate battle royale. It hit cable news. I had 3 death threats that were deemed serious by the police, and it was scary. It was difficult, and finally, after many months of fighting over this, we were face to face in 2007, and we being my attorneys, again pro bono against the school attorneys, put forth a case law, and it was the Mormon Church against X, and it came down to if they could have a Bible club, that we could have a gay-straight alliance. And their lawyers, their eyes were popping out of their heads, like, what are they using Mormon law for to come up with a gay-straight alliance case? But we won that fateful night, and I paid for it with some scares. The Bureau of Criminal Investigation is what I was trying to think of, and they called me in. Of course, you think you're going to be protected day and night, but when you leave, you're on your own. Mm. And we have, the joke used to be we had more cameras and alarms than Elvis did at Graceland. And you can't walk on the property without setting it off. And that was the high point of my career. And the second time I ran, I said statistically, and this has been proven by a professor of poli sci at SUNY Albany, I had proportionately the largest vote total in any contested school board election. And of course, that was before the Gay Straight Alliance. My third run was a much more humble one, but I'm very proud of that. That total that was, put together in seven different towns. So.
The next thing I wanted to kind of get into is a little bit more about your teaching and your teaching style, possibly how it changed over the years. Do you have a pet peeve that a student would do it and it would always just go right to your button that you couldn't stand?
I don't. My style definitely changed and was very unique. And if you talk to anybody that ever had me as a teacher, the first thing, other than my first year, as you know, was teaching 12th grade non-region students at a large and very difficult city school. I was all 21, and that was the challenge of a lifetime. All I could do was win their respect, and those words are a cliche. I had to work at it every day. So I found their reading level. I knew it was around sixth grade, despite their age. I got contemporary classic comics, and they read those along with their Norton anthology. So I thought I would get in trouble for it, but nobody ever dared to come up on the fourth floor and observe me. So we got through it. And Catcher in the Rye was the book that they were supposed to read, and I thought they can't read this. I mean, it's just not possible. And I asked how many people had read a book, and I only had 2 hands go up out
Wow,
of 5.
really?
That was it. And I said, well, you're all going to have read a book when this is done, because I'm going to read it to you. And I pointed it out and gave it a preface. This book is filled with sex. And really, I ought not to be reading it to you, but I know I can trust you guys. And after that, I owned them. And they were so anxious to hear that book. And of course, there were things conceptually that they didn't totally understand, so I'd explain it. And I'll say, well, I'm really climbing out on a limb here. Well, one of the hashtags of my teaching was there and later, that you're Peter Pan because they'll follow you anywhere. Well, they did. And I got through it. I mean, but it was constant. I had to constantly be coming up with other methods, because traditionally trying to teach Shakespeare or a classic novel to them, or even English grammar and composition, would have crashed and burned very quickly. And I used those things when I went up the hill to teach junior high school. But I was starting to say, anybody who had me at Shaker Junior will say red checks, because I came up with this format where if you talked out of turn, you got a red check, and that was -2. And there were 3 grades given in the North Colony District: achievement, effort, and conduct. And this is your conduct grade. And if I even picked up that red flare pen, you could see them move. And then then there was the black pen, which I think I used once, which was an instant failure for the semester. And then the horrible, nefarious purple pen, which made you flunk for the whole year. Well, of course, that was a myth. Nobody ever got the purple pen, but they saw it.
Even the black pen's scary, though. Whew.
It was very effective. And of course, every teacher, everybody knew Ray and his red checks, but that definitely surprised them. I also used the right side of my bulletin board, or my blackboard, every single day. It said for and the day next, so for Friday, and then it had a list, and then advance notices. Because when I was a kid, I thought the teachers, in too many cases, were just not organized enough, or maybe the students weren't focused enough, so they could never say, well, I didn't know I had to do that, because there it was on the right side of the blackboard. So now it would be a whiteboard, I guess. But so that organization, and I as an English teacher, in seventh grade, you had to have all the grammar, and we had Warner's English Grammar Composition, which is a classic text, and they used that. And I told them, we have 4 semesters. For 1 semester, this is going to be boring, and it's going to be drill and nothing else. And then I'll give you 3 semesters of reading and writing and doing plays, and that format that nobody else used. They didn't know what I was doing. My coworkers, and it worked very well because we made a deal. As far as I had my boss had a statement, Ray. You never have a problem. The only problem you ever have is with the All-American boy, and that didn't happen often. But there were some, I think, that realized that I didn't maybe meet their level of masculinity or suspecting my sexuality, and were a problem. But I can only think of 2, and one many years after I taught him apologized and turned out to be gay himself. So it was projection. Well, very very few were actually. There were very few problems. I was proud of my record.
So I'm noticing that a lot of your stories kind of referenced that you were open and honest with your students. You preset them. You gave them the expectations. You told them that your hands are tied. There's nothing you can do about it. We have to do this part of the curriculum, and then work with me, and we'll get through it together, and then we can do something that you guys want to learn about. Is that a good summary? Is that correct?
That's a very fair assessment. The interaction, the psychodynamic interaction between a teacher and a student was very very important to me. And it was much different than any of my coworkers, and no one ever criticized it because, believe it or not, despite my unusual teaching style, I had a very tightly controlled classroom, but it wasn't done by yelling or traditional methods. It was done by my methods, and I never, I said to them very clearly, I'll never lie to you, but God help you if you ever lie to me. And they knew. So, there has to be that line. And it's, again, it's a cliche, but someone said to me, who's on our, helps out with our shows, doesn't appear. People knew not to blank with Mr. I was at that time with Mr. Working.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because I was a pain. It was just that they knew if they went too far, and then it happened, as my mentor said, don't ever get upset more than 2 or 3 times a year. But I can remember a time when a kid threw another student up against the locker, and his head hit the sharp locker side, and it went right through virtually to the brain. And you could have heard me in Kalamazoo then, but it was, and those necessary times to show the emotion were required, I think, to let them realize if something goes terribly wrong, the teacher can take care of it. But it wasn't for ego or anything. I didn't enjoy it, obviously.
Right. I wanted to have you share your story about the Corvette alarm. I love this story. I love cars, so if you could share it with our listeners, that would be great.
Well, it was June 7th, 1973, and I was trading in I sold my 71 Mustang, and I bought my first Corvette. It had been ordered in January, and I had been getting more and more excited, and it took all that time. And the day came, and I got it. And, we were always worried about vandalism. Well, in my classroom, next to the light, room C102, there was next to the clock, rather, was a light. And the backstory is that long before I got there, they used to allow students to go from the study hall in that large room upstairs to the library. And the librarian would turn that light on from upstairs, and the teacher down in the study hall would know that the library was full. Well, these kids had no idea, hadn't paid attention to it. And I carefully planted the story to one of the students I knew would tell everybody. I said, do you know what that light is? And he looked up at it and never, ever remembering it was there all the time. I said, that's my Corvette alarm. What do you mean? I said, if anybody even goes near the car, a sensor goes off and that light will start flashing and it goes right to the police department. Well, it never passed his mind, the pragmatic reality of asking out, well, is that really true or whatever? And you had it put up there. And he did ask me that. I said, you wouldn't believe that alarm costs almost as much as a car. Almost. And the thing that was amazing was that story sped. We had 4 halls, so 4 small schools. By the time the day was over, I don't think there was, in that huge junior high school, I don't think there was anybody that didn't know that story. And nobody ever, needless to say, nobody ever went near the car. But I can remember them just peering up at that light in amazement, like it was this 8th wonder of the world, And to the day, I was there 20 years teaching, and it was never exposed.
I know you shared a little bit about how difficult it was to start your teaching career in the 70s, or actually in 1970 is when you started. Could you go a little bit into why it was so difficult?
Well, absolutely. The landmark decision, which took homosexuality, the act, from being took the crime aspect out of it, so it was no longer a crime, and also equally important, took it off the mental health chart as a mental illness. Happened in December of 73. Well, as you just mentioned, it was September of 70 when I set foot in a classroom. So in those times, I mean, you might as well have been in the dark ages. I mean, even if someone found it out and you found out that you were gay, or they could out you. I can remember teacher, that was the era of the mall rats, as they called them, as the 70s went on. Students spent so much time in the mall. Today, even someone your age, Alex, would never imagine what a mall rat is, I don't think. And teachers were watched. I don't mean just gay teachers, but they didn't want to shop in local malls, and so I would have to be very careful not to even appear with a friend or a relative that they could, Mr. Working was there with a guy, and if they were suspecting it to begin with, it could cause you all kinds of problems. So I have a phrase that I've used on the show at least a million times. I live the life, quote unquote, of a fugitive. That's why I so love that television show from 10th grade into my first year in college, because I felt I was leading the life of a fugitive. And simply put, it meant that if you were outed, or enough kids were, seeing you as what they perceived as gay and making an issue out of it, it could and would have cost you your job. Now, in today's era, I asked you that question, kind of threw the question back at you, and I know you're cautious as well, because it's a difficult interface, and it's much better here than it is certainly in the southern states. When I went to university and became a professor, I was amazed at how I didn't have to worry so much. Although even then, 20 years later, I didn't come out because I was still cautious. And I guess the simple answer is it could have cost you your profession, or certainly your job in that school. I don't think I doubt that many teachers ever went to a gay bar, for instance. I mean, that was something you just didn't do, because some random arrest of somebody, you could be there, and I was always looking over my shoulder and trying to present a persona that was masculine. I remember having parents' nights in the earliest years and telling people that I had a kind of a cold, and please put up with my throat, just so I seem more masculine. I was so careful to keep my arms at my sides, and any of the stereotypical things that might have been misinterpreted, I was cautious on. But the stress that brought about was very large.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
So that concludes the first part of our discussion with Dr. Ray. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, I can assure you, Alex, the pleasure is all mine. I can't wait to pick up where we left off because we really had some momentum in that first conversation.
All right, sounds good. I look forward to seeing you again.
My pleasure.
Stay tuned in. Part 2 is coming up right now.
If I were teaching ed courses now, I would say, don't ever think the story is fully written with your students because it goes on far beyond what you ever want.
Coming up, Dr. Ray is going to talk about difficult parent situations, homophobia, ageism, and leaving personal luggage at the door. All right, today we have Dr. Ray back to discuss part 2. How you feeling today, Dr. Ray?
I'm ready to go.
All right.
Motivated.
Yeah, I'm sure this will be just as good as part 1, if not better.
Well, we certainly put some momentum together in the first part of this experience, and I'm thrilled to be back to conclude it.
All right, let's get started.
Sounds good to me.
The first half of our conversation on the last episode was fantastic. We talked about how you reacted to the tragedy of losing a student to suicide. We also talked about your radio show, Homewood Radio, and we talked about how you started teaching in 1970 at an inner city school as a gay closeted teacher. Now I wanted to go into a slightly different direction. Do you have one or two students that really stuck out as the kids that gave you all heck? Like, they were very difficult and you were considering to just leave the profession altogether because they were such a challenge for you.
Well, first and foremost, I was brought up never to be a quitter, and this was my life, so I never would have let anybody push me that far unless they would set me up or something. But so I never thought of quitting, although I can remember I had a student, and it was a smart kid, but I was teaching capitalization in that 10-week stretch, and the rules of capitalization are very illogical. And I had this kid named Steve who kept raising his hand, I mean, dozens of times. And finally, my frustration level got so bad that I sent him I said, Steve, just go across the hall and get out of here. And it wasn't the typical misbehavior. It was just deliberately interrupting the class. Well, why is it like that? Doesn't make any sense. And putting that in dozens of different examples. And it was my 4th year of teaching. I never had anybody do anything like that. And it was a kid that I had no problems with. And I called his father. He was a math teacher at the high school. And they had gone to a basketball game. And he was furious with me for calling after the game. And they insisted on a meeting right away. And they wanted open counseling. They wanted it out in the hallway. Well, they convinced them, this is after school, to go inside. And he went at me like no other. He went at me personally. You have no children. You don't understand.
Oh, the parent went after you?
The parent went at me terribly. And the guidance counselor was there. So the cast of characters, parents, me, and a guidance counselor. The guidance counselor was a homophobe to the nth power, but extremely polite and extremely athletic. And he, the professional in him, or lack thereof, had connected with the fact that this was a teacher from high school. And he was giving me no support whatsoever. And the math teacher threatened to take his kid out of the school. And it was the longest meeting. It was after 7 o'clock that night, and we did it right after school. And we had a late schedule, but the buses left at 3:45. And then we gathered, and we were there that entire time. And it was all contentious. I got no support, as I said. And I looked younger than I was. So at that point, I'm probably 25. And I think he was circling around the fact that you're not a family man. You don't understand my kid. There was definitely a lot of testosterone feel in the room. And it ended, ultimately the kid went back in and everything was solved because it's such an atypical one. But when I reached my current Corvette at that time, I tell you, I thought it's a good thing you don't drink, Ray, because this is the one time you would do it. Because professionally, I was let down. The student didn't make any sense as to what his behavior was. And fast forward about, well, he was in 7th grade, maybe 8 years. He was at a local outside theater up in Latham and was in charge of tickets. And I was still single at the time. My mother called in for tickets, and he heard the last name. And he told my mother that I was the best teacher he ever had, and that he summarized sort of what happened and apologized
Wow.
to my mom for what he did.
Yeah.
I think it's unheard of. So I guess you could say it had a happy ending, with taking me down the road to hell and beyond as it unfolded.
Jeez,
atypical. Wow. I mean, everybody has this problems here, there, everywhere, but this was weird. It just was atypical, and I was so glad that ultimately, and now he keeps in touch with me. So there's another thing, and I as a gay teacher, if you're dealing with a student who is searching for their identity sexually, they can easily turn on you, very easily. And you have to be awfully careful that you don't, strike that nerve. And very different situations.
That's fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah. So was he the one that ended up coming out to you later?
He never came out to me in the typical way. I mean, when he didn't come out to my mom on the phone, but after that, he contacted me. That opened the door, and then he, long graduated. He came out to me, and we met on Facebook, and we never actually sat down person to person. We had talked on the phone at great length, and with the father that he had, you could see what a nightmare he was going through. And so we ultimately on the phone, he talked about how hard it was and how he had to hide it. He was a runner of great success, a track star, and he hit 10th grade, and his way of rebelling against his father for everything was just not to run anymore. And they were talking about an Olympic future. That may have been hyperbole, but I mean, he was that good. And no, I'm not going to run anymore. And I thought, well, you found a way to get your father to behave, maybe. And ironically, when our custodian passed away, and this happened last summer, a few people from the old guard came to the wake, and our custodian was a great friend of mine, was in his 90s, military background, and who showed up but the mother of this Steve. And I didn't recognize her, and she came over and she said, "Dr. Working," and she hugged me and she thanked me. She didn't say for what, for how, but I thought, if I were teaching ed courses now, I would say, don't ever think the story is fully written with your students, because it goes on far beyond what you ever will.
I'm really moved by that.
Thank you.
I have a couple more questions for you, if you still have the time.
I always have the time to.
So, one of my college professors, I can still hear her voice in my head telling me to leave my personal baggage at the door. And recently, I apologized to a co-teacher for not being my best self. I told her I was going through some difficult situations, and I cried during my lunch break, and she responded to me saying, "Oh, I didn't even notice that you were off today." So I guess, maybe that one time, maybe it worked out where I did keep the baggage at the door. I know it gets very hard to do that sometimes. How did you do that when you were teaching?
Well, as I mentioned before, we had 4 small schools, and each the 7th and 8th grade had math, science, social, and English teachers. They were called a block. Um, I became very close with my coworkers. I mean, I called it like the Mary Tyler Moore show because the chemistry was incredible. I watched several divorces go through. My closest friend, June Garnett, is long gone now. She went through a horrible divorce, and then they ended up getting back together. But I watched that, and the way she left her baggage at the door, even though I saw her suffer unbelievably with her desk across from mine. I had a relationship, a 23-year relationship, which ended in the middle of my teaching career, and we went back to my 11th grade, first day of 11th grade. So I was still young, but I thought we would be together forever. And how did I leave? I had to work at it so hard because I saw what happened. I mean, my friend that I mentioned, the aforementioned June Garnett, she was able to keep things under control. I saw some males who were in the midst of horrible divorces that weren't in my block, who were yelling at kids randomly. You could see they were hurting. I felt in my heart for what they were going through, but I also felt for the kids who did not deserve in any way, shape, or form to be treated like this. I don't know what the secret is. I can remember at the end of the day just wanting to sit down and cry. I mean, you're honest with your feelings. I mean, my hat goes off to you that you would shed tears in lunch so that at an appropriate time you're letting your feelings out. I think the worst thing you can do is to try to press everything down inside because you become a curmudgeon, and all of a sudden somebody will say, I had Mr. X 2 years ago, and they're saying, yeah, God, he's the worst person I've ever had. Or she's just, terrible. And people can't figure out what's happening. I would definitely suggest counseling, especially with my background in clinical psych. I mean, this is a time when you need to be talking to a person who's outside of the school and outside of your marriage, and really say, I'm having trouble getting through the day. I don't know what to do, and recognize it and put it out there. So the biggest advice I would have would be to find a good therapist and talk out your problems, because I'm telling you, the damage that a person can do in a year of and another horrible scenario is when a child is lost. The death of a young child. I mean, it may not come out in anger, but the personality of the individual is just completely changed. And if you're going to do that job, and you have to do it because you need your paycheck, you need to get help, and you need to talk. Sometimes there's someone there that will talk to you, a friend. A lot of teachers are not geared to that, but I was able to talk to people. But again, I had all my psych training, so I would find a friend, find a therapist, and realize that you just the phrase, the acronym, or the cliche, "leave it at the door" is fine. I mean, because that's what you should do. But how to leave the baggage at the door is another story. I mean, I see you. I mean, we talked about a recent day that you had, and it was very difficult, and yet, even though you had something going on privately in your life, you still managed to do everything. So it can be done.
Yeah.
But it's
hard.
I'll tell you,
it's hard sometimes. Yeah.
It's very hard.
Yep.
And occasionally it's going to break right through you, man. I've told people that because it happened with me. What's wrong with you today, Mr. Working? I can't tell them what's wrong with me.
Right.
Well, my partner and I, we just split up. I can't say that.
Yeah.
Or we're not getting along.
Right.
So again, get some help, the therapist, and don't stop with the first one, because you need somebody who understands the school setting. Support group too. I believe in support groups. Find an appropriate support group and do that. Recognize what's happening to you. Just the worst thing is not keep it inside. You just become a nasty person. Really, it's horrible.
Yeah, and we definitely don't want those people teaching kids. So
Well, no,
yeah,
it's like, I mean, I've seen it for alcoholism. We had a teacher who had a horrible. When I started teaching, there was the Good Old Boys Network, and I couldn't believe it. You know, I'm at probably I learned my dad 23, and Mr. Feeney, this is what you have to do. We have to keep an extra jacket here, and we have to keep mouthwash so he can go in the classroom. And the guys slept on the floor of the conference room, and then we put him in the classroom, and he's showing film strips and movies of God knows what, nothing to do with the subject he taught. And that's, talking about facilitating something. That's the other side of the coin. You don't want to, if you see somebody who through baggage, and alcohol can be the baggage, you don't want to facilitate it. But that was standard fare, believe it or not, back in '71. And I thought, wow, we're really not helping him at all. And we're certainly not helping the kids. And they would say to me, do you know that Mr. Feeney has alcohol in the back cabinet? And I saw him take it out and just chug it right down. At first, I couldn't believe it. And then I believed it real quickly after that.
wow, yeah, jeez. So I have two more questions. The first one is, what advice would you give a first-year teacher that may be nervous to start the first day ever in their career?
That's a tough one because, I was guilty of being nervous for sure. I would say you can use that feeling in your stomach. You can use that nervousness. And most people know that I bowl professionally, and I was on the pro tour twice and on television numerous times. I only mention that because I found that the way to win on television was to be nervous. Use your nervousness, because if you're flat in terms of your personality and bland, you're not going to convey things to the kids. So give yourself permission to be nervous, whether it's stepping up on television in front of umpteen million people or a classroom full of 30 kids. Use that and let it motivate you. And you don't want to go into a class. There's nothing more than the teacher. And I'm breaking a little bit from the first day of school, but I'm not worried. I would be worried if a first-year teacher, told me that they weren't nervous, because again, your performance can be reflected in that nervousness. You've been down this road. After the first few minutes, it dissipates to a point, and if you're teaching the way you should be, which is another thing, and it's, I told them so much. No matter how nervous you are, what you're teaching, keep your eyes on those eyes. And the minute that glaze comes over them, or they're not following you, that may be because you're nervous in the beginning, stop and say, guys, what's going on here? You're not listening to me. And they respond to that very well. And yet the best teachers I've ever known will not go on, especially with math, with a sequential curriculum.
Right, yeah.
I've taught all the math and science courses over the years because I have multiple certifications. And, if you're in the middle of trig and the eyes are rolling around, you better stop and go back. That applies to every subject, and go back and see what's wrong. Because when they lose it, when the connection is gone, that's when they get into trouble, and that's when they lose their desire. And use the nervousness. Use it. Make it positive.
Yeah.
Use it.
That's some good advice, though. That's awesome. So the last thing I want to end with is, it's your time to brag. So, Dr. Ray, what is that one super awesome success story that you've had during your career, either as a professor or working for the Trevor Project or Glisten or teaching? What's your moment to shine?
Well, actually, it happened the first year. I was at Watervliet High School, and Watervliet and Troy were really difficult schools. And the kids had not had a senior prom for many years, because every time they put one together, and I learned this, 10th hand from the legendary stories of the fights and the police being called, and so they just called up prom. So, when as the year unfolded, I got closer to the kids, and they came and they called everybody prof every male prof, and they said, "Prof, will you chaperone our our senior prom?" And of course, when the word got around, here's 21, 22-year-old kid, the guy who looks 12 or 14, which I was told, and he's gonna handle Waterbury High and have a prom after a decade or more. And I was very carefully picked the DJs. I talked to the kids. We had a bond at that time, and they played "To Sir with Love." The DJ did it. They stopped everything and they thanked me, and that was, of a lifetime of teaching in so many different levels and so many different subjects. That's my mind still goes back to that, because I thought, this is everything I always wanted to be as a student. I'm the most popular teacher, and I'm only X number of years old, and these kids really like me. And I know one of the ones that was the toughest. I pulled into a gas station many years later, and he said, "Prof, prof." And I said, "Oh, God, this has got to be Waterbury High." And maybe 15 years later, and he owns the gas station. He said, "I've only read one book, but that's only because of you, and I own this gas station." And he's pointing to his Corvette, which he has, because he's everything, he's living had a very lucrative business. And he said to me, "I owe it all to you." And I thought, I don't have to live another day.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was early on, and I think the reason it was so early was because it set the stage for what was to follow. I mean, you wonder, could I survive? I mean, I don't think there was one person in that, one faculty member in that school that would have given 10 cents for my chances of surviving. And I not only survived, I thrived. And
Yeah, you had a very successful career.
I loved what I did. I loved going to school every day. My father was at the time was a school bus driver his whole career, and at that time he had the longest consecutive number of years, and which was 46. And his motto, which is on the school bus garage, say named after him, dedicated to him, was, when I was on the board, was 1,000,000 miles and 1,000,000 smiles. And my dad loved to go to work every day. And I looked at so many people, oh God, it's Monday. Oh, we're going to do Friday. Not my dad. He said, I set their day, every student's day, when I smile and say hello to them. And I picked up on that and used it in my teaching. And I mean, there were a lot of challenges. I don't want to leave a Pollyanna feel. I mean, I had a kid who became eventually a convicted Hell's Angel killer, and because he was high when he came into this 12th grade class, he just put his head down. So he was not the challenge. But I mean, life is, one of the ways of looking at it it is that broad based. If I were listening to this interview, and I would say, well, boy, this guy has lost touch with reality, which I didn't. I mean, I don't know. We had a lot of challenges, a lot of kids with problems, and you've got almost a decade behind you now, and it's not easy. It's the ultimate challenge to be a great teacher, but I also feel it's the ultimate reward.
Yeah, there's definitely some moments that just recharge you, and uh, all your worries for a second or two go away, because it's just a magical thing and a magical feeling that you just get when a kid understands something that you've been working on for so long, or a kid opens up to you and shares what's going on. It's just, there's so many little things that can happen in a day, and just, it's the best reward, really.
I know it's funny. We talked about the radio show. One of the RPI students figured out that based on how long I taught and how many kids I taught, that I reached more people in the first 15 minutes of one show than I did in my entire career. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. If I can help them in any way. Because we have our audience for the show, as I told you, it's filled with very young students who they don't want to leave a trace on the computer or footprint, but they can find somewhere to listen to the radio show, and they'll do that. And they didn't have to worry about being, have somebody fun with it. They listen to it. So, you already have, as I've said, an incredible fan club, because your perception, your persona is young, and yet it's savvy, and you're a role model. And everything with the kids is LGBTQ plus kids is role models. And you've already, much to your credit, have become a role model to a lot of kids who want to meet you. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's very kind.
You're most welcome.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to listen to Homo Radio, when do they listen? Where? How?
Well, we are on live, which is unusual these days, from 11 until 2, 3 hours. It's a syndicated show, but our broadcasting is from the RPI, actually at university, college/university. And you can listen on the traditional radio at 91.5 FM live during those hours. It's also available on any electronic device, including in the White House, where President Obama once listened to part of the show. And you can do that by going to WRPI.org. That's all it is, www.wrpi.org. And on any electronic device, anywhere, anyway, anyhow, you can listen to it that way. Now, for some people, Sunday morning, 3 hours is not the easiest time. So we also have you going to the Homo Radio website or WRPI website, but I would recommend Homo Radio website. And you put in homoradio.org to get to it, homoradio.org. And you'll find a menu. And Alex, you can explain it. You just find the menu and look for
on the top. On the top, there's archive, and you select that down and select the year of the show and find the date. And 2 tabs over from archive, you can actually listen. It says listen to WRPI live as well. So if you just go to homoradio.org, you can listen live right there as well. So.
And the archives go back to, I believe, 2017. The show goes back to 92, as we said.
Yeah.
But you can, if you miss it, or I've actually known people, they liked it so much that they wanted to listen to multiple shows or go back see what it was like 5 years ago. So that's another option.
Definitely. And I know on the show you give out some contact information if any individual is in need of some support, especially in an emergency situation around suicidal thoughts. Would you mind sharing that?
I'd be honored. My email is drrayworking@yahoo.com, and working is spelled WERKING. drrayworking@yahoo.com. And my private cell is area code 518-928-0677. One more time, 518-928-0677. And that's anytime, night or day. If you want to learn something about the show, you'd like to recommend an idea, or maybe come on the show and tell your story, run it by me and we'll see what we can do.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming on and just sharing your experience with all of us. And it's great to know that there are great people out there like yourself that are retired and they still haven't stopped working, and they are all about helping the community, the people around them. So thank you so much for everything you have done, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, I'd like to return the thanks because it's my pleasure to be on your podcast. I mean, talk about coming a long way in a short time. You're on the road to stardom.
Yeah, well, hopefully, we'll see. So.
There's some hopeful. I love it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
That was a fascinating conversation with my good friend Dr. Ray, producer and host of Homo Radio right here in Troy, New York.